meeting just online, but this is a fantastic venue. It's good to be able to communicate with all of these people instantaneously from all over the world and spread the love and the knowledge and share what we know. That's one good thing about COVID.
For sure.
All righty. We are live. Chris, will you log on to our YouTube to make sure the sound and everything is working properly while I give these introductions?
Sure.
All right. Thank you. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for participating in our monthly Zoom presentation. We're very excited to have Jim with us from Colorado. My name is Allie. I am one of the many people on the CTMS leadership crew. I want to say thank you to Angel. She can't be here today, but she helps organize this meeting and it helps us on so many levels. So huge shout out to her. There's a few events that we have coming up that I wanted to share with everybody, so y'all can mark your calendars. We have been doing a few in-person events and have been sticking to online events. So our next in-person event is at Jester King. If anyone's been there, it's a pretty amazing brewery, plus they have a farm. So that is on Friday, October 8th, and it's happy hour. So that's a way for all of our members and non-members, everybody's welcome to join us at our happy hour. We're gonna be going to Jester King because they just made an oyster beer. So we're really stoked to try that. And we'll be hanging out with Farmer Peppy too. So that should be really fun. He has a bunch of goats. We're also doing an online workshop with Andrew Denny. It's about wild cloning. So after this talk, it'll be like a very nice talk to also come to, so we can, wild clone all this turkey tail and reishi, and then we can start inoculating our own ligustrum logs, as we'll learn more throughout the talk. I did just jump around on dates. So the wild cloning one is tentative for December 2nd. Just keep it in your headspace. We will have it up on the website calendar and in our newsletter. If you're not signed up for a newsletter, definitely go to our website and sign up, centraltexasmycology.org, and I'll put it in the chat. That's the best way to keep up with all of our events. So wild cloning class online December 2nd with Andrew Denny of South Texas Seasonal. And I'm bouncing around, sorry, y'all. Jester King happy hours on October 8th. And our next talk is with Chris Kennedy. We're also really excited about that one. That's the third Thursday in October. That's our theme. Our online presentations are the third Thursday in October. And that one's about myco design. So we're super pumped for that one too. Chris is new to town. He lives in Austin now and has just done a lot of amazing projects building things with myco materials. So definitely tune in for that one. All the information's on our website already. So share with your friends, family, or the person sitting on the bus next to you. Just share it. It's going to be great. Now I'm going to pass it on to, so Jim, thank you for joining us today. We're very excited. So Jim and Chris Jim's going to be presenting during this talk. And I just wanted to welcome Chris Garza. If you want to introduce yourself before the talk starts as well. And then we'll jump in. Sorry if that was awkward. I'm just a little awkward, y'all.
Yeah, sure. I'll say a little brief introduction. My name is Chris Garza. I'm been an active member of the Central Texas Mycological Society for maybe around a year now. And my background is in ecology and invasive plant management and things like that. So that's why I was asked to help moderate today's talk. Yeah. And Jim, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you all for coming tonight and spending a Thursday evening learning about all that we're going to cover today. I'm going to try to cover a lot as quickly as I can. But first, who am I? Why am I here presenting? I think it's a fascinating story. But my background in the mycology is I founded a company, 100th Monkey Mushrooms, and we actually got our start in Austin. And if you remember from back in the day, probably 2011, 12, 13, we did the downtown farmers market, and you might have seen our booth there back in the days, and how that pertains and ended up running into this log study I'll get to in a little bit. And currently I'm doing a consultation in the world of mycology, from anything from lab work to setting up labs, how to create spawn. There's such a booming interest in this area, and there's so many people that want to know about this valuable field. So I'm offering my services in that way. So anyway, as for my introduction, I just wanted to go ahead and just show you who I am and what some of the things that we did in the past when I was at 100th Monkey Mushroom. So we made, we stole the idea, of course, to make mushroom kits, and not many people were doing it back then. So we, I'm trying to get my, oh, there it goes. Okay. So yeah, we did the plug spawn, we did shiitake kits, lion's mane, pia pino, blue oyster, and just basically created spawn for people, and also a lot of education around how do you grow. That's one of my passions, is how do we educate people so that it makes it as simple as possible. And to me, to be able to put a bag full of spawn and then say, hey, go stuff a scarecrow with a bunch of oyster spawn and they'll grow out. And kids love this, love this too. If you wanted to see any of that, and it's pretty common on YouTube now, YouTube University, we can find this information so readily, and I'm so happy to hear that. But I left up the channel, and there's still a lot of people that go there, and it's just really basic log inoculation, how to create garden beds and so on. So I left it up there for posterity's sake. And so, yeah, and so now I'm on to the consulting world and out of the production world, but still have a passion. And in particular, getting into this area of mycroremediation. As I said earlier, I think that the whole world, from foraging to consumption to the medicinal uses and the remediation, is like we're on the tip of it. And I know most of you who are here can feel that momentum that's building behind it. And so that's one of my missions is, okay, I have this knowledge, like how do I give it to the world? So I'm grateful to be here, to be able to just spread this little piece, and hopefully somebody takes something out of here of like, oh, here's another application, and we all get to build on each other's knowledge. So as for this study and how this came about, obviously those of you who are in the Austin area are very familiar with the Ligustrum and it being considered an invasive species. And I can see why, as you look at the seeds and the birds and how this battle of the Ligustrum is ever going to be won, I don't know. But what started this whole thing was back in around 2011 or 12, I was in the Barton Springs Greenbelt, and I was running down the path, and I serendipitously stumbled upon a biologist who was working for the city of Austin, and he had a forlorn look as he was looking at a pile of slash from Ligustrum, where a crew went through and they had cut down a bunch of Ligustrum. And in that year, that was the year of the extreme drought that year, and there was the fire scare was huge at that time. And so he was standing with one of his colleagues, and they were just thinking about this fire hazard from this slash pile. So, and sorry that some of the words are blocked out, but I'll explain if you can't see. So in the background of this photo, that's the Barton Springs Greenbelt path, and it's near the 360 axis. And it really doesn't matter where you go in that Greenbelt to find mushrooms because they're so prolific down there. But literally, as I came across this biologist having this discovery or this discussion, looking at this pile of Ligustrum slash, over his shoulder was this right here. This is, if you can see in the foreground of this picture, that's a old Ligustrum stump, and it's covered with turkey tail mushrooms. And so, like many of you, the next logical thought is, why don't you introduce that species directly to this pile to get it break down faster? It made sense to me, and I'm sure that makes sense to most of you as well. So this is the actual, the turkey tail, and again, it's growing on a Ligustrum stump. that I took a section of it, took it back to the lab and isolated it or cloned it and put it on a Petri dish. And a year or two went by. I gave him my card. And during that year, let me move this over if I can. During that year, he called me and he said, "Hey, this is so-and-so. And I was thinking about that idea that you had about decomposing these piles more rapidly." And so we started this process and it turned into a study, which we'll get to and what we found out. But it wasn't just the fire hazard that was my concern. Having that ecological mindset, again, like many of you do, and the role of the fungi that they play in that kingdom is, here's the other thing that I was thinking is that how do we return that organic matter back to the soil more quickly? And in these places that they were working, they couldn't get wood chippers in there. That would be the fastest way to do it, is to chip the wood, put it down on the ground, and then you could inoculate it then too, which I'm going to talk about later, but to put it back into the soil. Because the other thing is, with all that biomass off the ground, like you see in this picture, is it's not creating the life that needs to be in that soil to create the next generation of trees. So not only are the Ligustrum blocking out the native species, but also that fertility is not going back in there. So as I'm thinking about this, like, let's get it back as quickly as we can into the soil. And the logs that can also be used for erosion control and water retention, depending on how you place them once they're inoculated. But the other thing that struck me is that the turkey tail, as most of you know, is an extremely medicinal mushroom. And throughout this process, not only are we have the benefits of reducing the fire hazard, the decomposition, replacing it back into the organic cycle, but also we just created a factory of medicinal mushrooms. And has that market been tapped into, if you want to put it in market terms? But if this were to go onto a larger scale, it makes sense to me that if you were one of the people who participated or knew where these inoculated piles were, which I would love to see as best practices every time a volunteer crew goes in there, is that now next year where you can get a whole handful of medicinal mushrooms. And as we start expanding that out into the other, like the Ganodermas, for example, it's like, that makes sense to me. So we got multiple layers of what's going on in here. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with this or just new to what do you mean by log inoculation, this is a different stump. This is not Ligustrum, but just this is one of the things we did. This was a tree that was cut down. I cloned a mushroom that was growing in an orchard on a peach tree and then inoculated. And then within 1 year, this is what came out of it. And those of you who know how to tincture or to powder, it's like that's a long time, a long supply of medicinal mushroom right there, just from that simple process. So it turned into this study, and turning an invasive hardwood into an asset. And I love how they titled this, because like I said, I just mentioned probably 4 different assets that came out of this rather than just decomposing it. And this was published in 2019, the original study. I think we started it officially in 2015, but of course it took 2.5 years for everything to come to fruition, and the mushroom fruit body started way before then. But their final results, they said, okay, that's enough time. We've got enough data to show the efficacy of this method, and I'll show you that in just a minute. So let me move this out of the way too, because I don't want to take credit for too much of this, because these are the people that did the lion's share of this. So this is Lisa O'Donnell and Laura Moulton and Daryl Hutchinson, who helped out with the statistics. And these are the ones who did the vast majority of the writing of this. And they were from the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve. And I'm not quite sure, but I believe there are 3 preserves in Austin, somewhere around the Austin area, where they are responsible for the preservation of 32,000 acres. So in the original study, they went to, I believe it was 2 of their sites and inoculated 30 logs to begin with. So again, those of you who just aren't familiar with that process, is basically isolated. I don't really like the word clone because it sounds too far out there in genetic engineering. But basically took a tissue sample, isolated it away from all the contaminants, and got it onto a petri dish. And from there, created just bags of grain spawn. Then we created bags of hardwood sawdust spawn, and then passed it on to the people at the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve. So I took that mushroom that I saw on that first stump, kept it in my library, and when they were ready to do the study, created the spawn for them. I'm like, here's 25 pounds of spawn, go to it. And so these are some of the actual logs, some photos from the logs. And I believe these were about when the logs were inoculated a year later. And you could already see how there's quite a bit of growth on these logs. This study was relatively small, and I'll tell you about the extended version that was much larger in a minute. But on the left, basically, this is how they set it up: is they use some control logs, of course, and of course, these are Ligustrum. So on the left, those are uninoculated control logs, and on the right, these are some of the inoculated logs. And this metal rod right here, I'll talk about this right here. I'll talk about what that is in just a minute, but that's actually what's called a penetrometer. One of the challenges of this study was, how do you measure decomposition in a log? And do you weigh it by dry weight, wet rate? What if it rains on it? Do you take cross sections, but then you need a perfect diameter to control it to the control? And so that was one of the struggles of this study: is how do you know? How do you measure it? How do you quantify it? And one of the things that was ultimately used, and used to a much larger extent, was this more objective measure of how far can you penetrate that log. So again, here are some of the logs. And on this photo, you can see that one of the methods, they did actually a couple of interesting things when they laid out the first study. And some of the logs they would drill them. They used a 1/2-inch drill bit. They would drill it, pack it with the spawn, and then they would cover it up. And they also wanted to check, did the inoculation rate have a significant effect, which it did, of course. They used 1, 3, 7, 9 holes per log. And of course, the data I'll show you in a minute, like the more you inoculate it, the faster it's going to go. And another thing that they did was, and part of this was, they had volunteer groups that were doing this inoculation. And so we had to design it so it was simple, repeatable, and viable for the future. Because if this were going to become a process that was used often, it couldn't be difficult, it couldn't be expensive, it had to be something that a group of volunteers could take with them. And so one of the things, besides a cordless drill for inoculating the holes, was they took a cordless saw and they scored the logs. And you can see it in this photo A, where they scored the logs and they packed the spawn into the score mark. And then the problem then became, well, how do we carry the wax out there? How do we heat it up? And so what they did was they took newspaper, and they were most of the time near a creek, and they wetted it and basically used it as a plug to stop up the spawn from falling out. To me, I'm not a big, huge fan of the wax. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, unless there are unless you're using grain spawn, which of course I would never suggest inoculating a log with grain spawn. Within a matter of days, the insects will eat all of your grain and it'll be totally gone. So use sawdust spawn on your logs. But if it stays in there, to me, it's like, I love this analogy of mycelium and fire. Because as long as you can get the mycelium to catch fire inside of that log and start spreading through, its job is relatively done. And so this packing of the newspaper, the wet newspaper, just allowed it to start growing in there. Of course, it dried up after a while, but at that point, it had moved into the body of the log, and it was protected by the moisture of the log itself. Okay. Let me take a pause right there. Actually, let me see what our next slide is. Yeah, and then we'll take a pause and see if we have any questions. And this is the standard you can see in photo A to the left. That's just your standard drill inoculation. And they did cover these holes with wax. And again, there was just prolific fruiting on all of these. This log on the left was one that was scored with the saw. You can see the saw marks that are here. And this one obviously was one that was drilled. All right, let me pause right there. Does anybody have any questions? Chris, is the best way to do it is in the chat or just to speak them out loud?
I can just repeat the ones that came up in the chat.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, somebody asked, were any of the piles left for habitat? That might be one reason for leaving some versus trying to break them down quickly.
Yes, I would say definitely. This doesn't happen overnight. Obviously, the smaller brush it's hard to inoculate that smaller brush, and as long as that's off the ground, it's going to take a long time to decompose. So if the main logs are inoculated, that thin brush, that 1/4 inch down, up to 2-inch stuff, that's left for habitat. Of course, there is that balance between, is that then a fire hazard? So yes, it's inevitably going to be used as habitat because you can't inoculate it all.
Okay, great, thanks. Another question was, does inoculating a cut Ligustrum stump also help it from resprouting?
That was one of the things that they were looking at, and it did not. It would grow on the stump, but I believe it's probably all of that resprouting comes out of the cambium layer right on the edge, and these are decaying more of the heartwood and the sapwood. So it's an interesting combination. So part of it's dead, but part of it's alive, and that was one of the issues that came up during the study. Is like, is the mycelium going to kill the log so it doesn't resprout? But as we know, these are saprophytic, so it's not a parasitic. It's not going to kill the log. It's going to just exist on the dead wood. But there were, I believe they did have some stumps that actually were fruiting on the middle, but were actually producing more ligustrum spouts on the outside. And what's the way to best handle that is because then you start getting into the herbicides to kill it off. And I'm not quite sure. Maybe we'll leave that to one of the better minds here to figure out that conundrum.
Okay. Maybe a quick answer to this question: soy or beeswax? What did they use? Do you know?
I believe they use soy.
And then, what time of year is best to do this kind of stuff?
Beginning of your season, when it starts to get warm, the inoculation is best when you give it that long period of time to get established. Again, if you think about it with that analogy of fire, let the fire catch. If you do it right when you go into your cold season, it's just going to go dormant, and then there are chances that it doesn't get that jump start. But if you give it that long 6 months to grow, it's going to establish. And then when it does get cold enough there, it'll go dormant.
And were the logs relatively green? Were they just cut, or were they already decaying?
Yes. Yeah, that was the other part of this when we were thinking of the practicality of this, and it has to be practical in order for this to work. Because we did have that discussion, because as log inoculators, the common knowledge is that you cut it, let it sit for a few weeks for the antifungals to dissipate, and then inoculate. I found in my experience is I cut and inoculate on the same day, and the practicality of sending volunteer crews in there to inoculate the trees and then come back, or to cut the trees and then come back 2 weeks later, isn't feasible. I think those volunteer groups that are working down in the green belts, you're lucky if you can get that many people to volunteer 2 or 3 times a year, and it just has to all happen at the same time. So I haven't found a significant difference in just doing them. That stump that I showed earlier is like, that tree was cut down and inoculated on the same day. Within 1 year, it fruited.
Great. Somebody says they have to do some clearing this weekend of Ligustrum in Boerne, Texas. Is there something they could do that quickly to turn around? Can they look for turkey tails on their property and try to just stuff them in holes or something?
Yeah, I've thought of that often, and I have seen people do that. And, the time that it takes to make sawdust spawn that's all pure and doesn't have any other organisms in it, you don't have that much time. So yeah, I would actually do that. If you could find, that's low tech as you can get. And I love it, because it will grow. It will grow, especially if you can get the stem butt, the bottom part in there, not so much the actual pore part, but if you can get the part that's closest to the log and stuff them in there, fantastic, because it'll catch fire. Yes.
I'll just do a couple more. They keep pouring in, but we'll get back to your presentation after a couple more. Somebody asked, how do you determine your best companion species, fungi to invasive? How do you choose turkey tail versus another species, depending on what plant you're looking at?
Okay, first and foremost, it's whatever is growing naturally on there. And that's a super important part of this discussion, is nature's already figured that out. It's adapted to it. It's adapted to your climate. It's adapted to the woods. Don't bring in a turkey tail that you got from online somewhere that was produced out in Washington State, because it's adapted to Washington State. You're in Austin, Texas. It's different woods, and it's the same species name, but Mother Nature has figured that out. So whatever's growing on it, that's why when I was standing there with that meeting, I said, there it is right there. Look at that stump. You don't have to do anything to it. It's already adapted to it. And we're going to see at the end of the presentation, I just saw a photo of, you had some Ganoderma that was growing on some Ligustrum stumps. So that wood and that species are already matched up. You don't have to try to reinvent the wheel or experiment. So that one will work too. And that is, as many of us know who have grown turkey tail before, one of the main reasons I chose it is because it is so aggressive. There are times where I've inoculated logs with shiitake and a turkey tail nearby, and it took it over, and now it's sprouting turkey tail and just knocked the shiitake out. Speaking of that, just kind of a little bit of philosophically what I think about this turkey tail. This is one of the most ubiquitous mushrooms in the world. It exists everywhere. And I don't think that's an accident. I think that is what I was saying earlier about the medicinal effects of this mushroom. It's where the people are. It's as if it's showing itself to you. It's like, hey, there's something important in here. The medicinal part is one of them. Maybe the remediation is another, but it wants us to know that it's there.
Great, thank you. We do have a couple more questions. I don't know if
that's what I mean. Is like all this information. This is what we're sharing with each other. So
absolutely. Okay, great.
Yes, of course.
Somebody was asking about parasitic fungi, potentially for using on a live ligustrum in combination with turkey tail. John Hardasher brought up Armillaria melia, the ringless honey mushroom, I think.
Yeah. Yes.
And wondering if that's a potential option as a parasite that could help, actually kill the ligustrum.
Yeah. I would stay away from that, because we don't know the unintended consequences of introducing something that's not already there. I don't know, and this would be a great question for the group, if is there a parasitic fungi that exists naturally in the Central Texas area that is killing the ligustrum? And I don't think so. If that were, it probably wouldn't be as invasive as it is. But to introduce a parasite on a large scale, I think there's too many potential ramifications for things going awry. Like now, is it spreading to the cedar elm and so on? So I wouldn't suggest that one. But we do know that this one right here is strictly saprophytic. So it's just going to grow on dead wood.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So, I guess if there's a fungus that's more of a specialist, that would be ideal. That way you're not introducing a generalist parasite that once the ligustrums die, then it's just, going after the remaining trees in the area.
Exactly. And that's another reason that I think that, and there's a lot of people out here who know how to do cloning. This is what I would suggest for everybody across the country, is that everybody, if you have the knowledge to do so and the equipment, to start creating a culture library that's specific to your region. so that it can be used. And I know there's somebody in this group here that's already started a local collection, and that would be the person to go to, have it be within 25-mile radius, then you know that it's local there. The other reason I mentioned that is if we do start using this in a larger scale, and you start getting into needing permission from the Army Corps of Engineers, one of the things they're going to look at is this going to damage the ecology of this system? And to tell them that it already exists here, it's been here for who knows how long, it's already here. We're not introducing, we're amplifying.
Yeah, great. Somebody was talking about how they've been girdling Ligustrum on their property, and just leaving the tree standing for habitat. But they're wondering if they can still inoculate those trees. I guess you were saying it doesn't necessarily have to be immediately when they're cut, but it just makes sense. They could probably still do it now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you can, once you girdle them, you can inoculate them there. I think the other factor, if they want to leave them standing, that's great. But one of the other keys is, and if you look at these photos, you can see, is that water is life. And if you have a standing tree, it's not getting much water. If you lay it down on the ground, that water is going to be absorbed out of the ground. And you can see all of these are fruiting at ground level because that's the moisture horizon right there. So it's kind of, it's watering itself. When it's standing, you don't have that. And so even if you inoculate it, it's going to take most likely a much longer time to decompose. So I would suggest leave some, drop the rest, and put them down on the ground. That's where the decomposition stands. That's where it works. That's magic, down on the ground.
Right. I'd say let's go ahead and continue with the presentation, and I'll keep compiling these questions.
Yeah, of course. These are great. Thank you. And keep them coming, because these are all fantastic, because there's somebody else out there who wants to build on that information. Okay, so back to the study a little bit, and this, don't read this. I hate reading now. I'd much rather watch the video. But basically what this slide is about is that when I was talking earlier about how do you classify decomposition in a log, is one of the methods that they had to use in that original study, which the N, or the number of logs, was, I believe, 30, is they weren't using the Penetrometer at that stage. And so there is in the wood decay world, there is such a thing. There is a classification system. And so basically it's a 1 through 5 of visually, subjectively looking at it and say, for example, number one is the least class of decay. It's structurally intact, few signs of woody decay, and retains its original color. And then number 5, as you can see, it's like the wood is soft, it's disintegrated, and we're going to see some of that a little bit. So I just bring this up because how do you, when you're talking in the scientific mind, we need to see evidence, we need to see proof and put a number on it. So we're dealing with subjectivity and objectivity at the same time. And so let me move this out of the way here. And so at the end of the study, so this was after 36 months, and the decay class of class 5 and 4 and 5, those are the highest levels of decay. And so and this was the number of inoculation spots, right? I mentioned earlier, they were either cutting with the saw or they were drilling with the 1/2-inch drill bit. And so if it had 0 inoculation, basically this is the control group. And so only 20% of them were in class, 1 and 2. But in the group where there was 9 inoculation sites, is that, everything was in class 4 and 5. And that was after 3 years. After 36 months. Now this photo right here, to me, and I'll move this here in a second so we can see it. This was part of the actual study. This one to me sums it up. And what's going on is if you look at the photo in A, this was a control log right here. Oh, one of the other things they also did, and I thought this was a fantastic idea, is some of the control logs, they scored them to see if one of the factors involved, was it native species that were infiltrating through the score marks. And so you can see on this log, this is actually a non-inoculated control log, but see where they scored it in these 7 places right here. And this was an inoculated log right here, or what remains of it. So these two were done on the same day, cut and laid down, and you can see the difference. And this is after, I believe it's, yeah, so this was after 3 years. And here's another inoculated log right here after 3 years. So you can see the level of decomposition that's gone on compared to the control logs. Now, as I mentioned in that original study, there was only 30 logs in that original study, the one that was published in that paper. Shortly after the paper was published, I came to Austin. I'm in Colorado now. I came to Austin and did a weekend workshop on growing and taught the people at Balcones how, and the city of Austin. It's like, here's a flow hood. You guys grow your own and start doing this. And I don't know what happened. I'll leave that up to some of you to find out. But while I was there, I suggested I would do this study on a much larger scale. And so they did. And that was in 2017, I believe. And so they changed it. They increased it to 144, and that includes the logs and the controls and so on. And they had some fantastic results in that as well. So again, back to that whole decay class, is the green line right here. These are the inoculated group right here. And the T1 was just the standard, the control logs. And then the T2 was the logs that were not inoculated, but scored. And so they did this actually at 3 different properties of Balcones. And this one was at the Vero Preserve? Sorry. Vero Preserve, Riker Ranch, and I can't see the other one, but it was at 3 different locations. So they also wanted to see if the location had something to do with it. Oh, Riker Ranch, Vero Preserve, and I can't see it. Whatever the third one is, I don't remember. But you can see that they had some similar results for all of them. And again, this was that decay class study. Now, again, we're still into this world of objective observation of how much decomposition. So I was really glad to see that they introduced the Penetrometer, which is much more objective in its measurement. And what this is this is a soil penetrometer, and farmers use it to see how much, how hard their soil is, basically. And you can see there's a gauge on the top of it, and they put a certain designated amount of pressure on the logs to see what happened. And here were the results. And these just came out, and this is again the larger study. These just came out last month. So now that it's been 2.5 years, an N of 144 is, and I love this sentence, and this was Daryl we had this discussion of how do you quantify decomposition in terms of years. And he said, that's a tricky conversation. So basically, here's how he worded it. And I love how he said this. He said, the average rate of change of 11.0, and that was their measure of depth, that after 2.5 years decomposes 11 times faster than the control as measured by a penetrometer. So the rates of penetration, again, under a standard pressure, 16, 10, and these were the uninoculated logs, 0.45, 0.37. So it's actually, if you do the math, it's much higher than 11 times the penetration. And if you look at this photo, you can see that if you try to put a penetrometer in there, it's obviously going to go right through. And they did have that. They did have that issue on many of the logs where the penetrometer just poked all the way through. All right, let me pause right there because I want to expand this out into some more applications. So that was the gist of the study that took place and is still taking place in Austin. So this would be a good time to just pause and get some questions.
Sure. Yeah. 1 second. Let's see. Is there a risk of non-native fungi becoming invasive because of this kind of work? I guess it would basically be if you were introducing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And again, that's back to, that's why you want to use the native change. start making your libraries, those of you who have flow hoods.
Somebody was asking if the Army Corps of Engineers is involved with mycology yet, if they have some kind of library, or do you know of any other organizations or agencies that are doing these libraries?
Yes, I don't know about the Army Corps of Engineers. I would hope that they would be on to these methods, but I do know that they're thinking about it from every angle, and they are hypersensitive on anything where you're going to deform the existing native ecology. And so they're very sensitive to that. So that question will be inevitable. As for people who are creating libraries, yes, there's, I believe it's called the Mycoflora project, and I believe that's nationwide. And they actually have one that's based out of the Denver Botanical Society, and they have a whole department that is designated to fungi. And there's a gentleman there who is running that whole program, and he started a library for this environment here in Colorado. Whether that exists in Austin, I don't know, or in that area, but that's why I'm putting it out to all of the amateur / semi-pro mycologists here, is if we start creating that bank as a community, then when it comes to inoculation projects, you can say, oh, hey, I got some spawn, I created some turkey tail, I created some reishi, let's go inoculate some ligustrum or whatever it is, and we know that it's local.
Somebody said, with the broken down logs, did the larger study look at effects on soil carbon deposits? In other words, was more carbon left deposited in the soil, or did it get respired?
It did not. I think that's the next logical step. So I have been having that discussion as well about, and then if some people have even projected it far enough to say, can we start inoculating logs and create carbon credits and sell them on the market? All right, there you go. There's a business idea for somebody. All right, take it and run with it.
I think, let's see. I think we've gotten through most of the questions. I have some questions that I could ask.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
What do you think about combining fungi? Do you think, I guess turkey tail is a white rot fungus. For everyone who's listening, it decomposes lignin in wood. And then there's brown rot fungi, which decompose cellulose. Do you think combining something like that could help it break down faster? Or do you think that the fungi would kind of antagonize each other and slow the process down? What do you think?
Yeah, I was just having that discussion as well. That's what I mean, is like this, all of this is in the collective consciousness of, because can you introduce one from one end, one from the other, and they kind of commingle and coexist? And that's on my plate to do that one, because I was thinking about the same thing. As for white rot and brown rot, I think that the brown rots, I'm really interested in the brown rots because the majority of the wood is cellulose. I think it's around, the average is about, depending on the wood species, about 70%. So 70% of that wood is the cellulose. So if you're using a brown rot fungi, do you have a better chance of decaying it more quickly? Do you have a better chance for carbon sequestration and selling them on the market? I don't know. Those are all things to be found out by maybe someone in this audience.
Do you think that that just using turkey tails on a large scale like that could lead to just an imbalance in the ecology of fungi, that, where there's all these other fungi out there and we're kind of just pushing one strain? Yes. Do you think that it's going to potentially create some kind of imbalance? Yeah,
there's definitely the possibility for that. And because we all know the effects of monocropping. And so if you're going to monocrop a turkey tail, is the same thing going to happen? And that's why I loved, I believe it was Ali sent me, or maybe it was Angel or Ali sent me a picture of someone, the reishi was growing off of ligustrum. So yeah, do them all. Find the top 5 saprophytics and spread them out, spread the love around so that you don't get that imbalance. But yeah, that is a possibility because it's never been done on a large enough scale to know. We're minimizing as much as we can by using the naturally existing, the ecotypic native species. but what does it look like on a larger scale? Like, we don't know. Are we throwing something off? That's a great question.
We had one question asking, are there hybrid strains? And I don't know if she's referring to fungi, or maybe she can clarify what she's asking.
Yeah. Not
but-
that I know of. No.
Okay, well, I think that, oh, she says like hybridizing turkey tail with lions, like lion's mane.
No, I don't think we can cross over that way. Although I have thought of that one too. Yeah. So, okay. Well, thank you guys for those questions. Those are great. I wanted to kind of not go off on a complete different tangent, but I want to expand the scope of what we're talking about here and show just a slightly different application, but in a little bit different setting. Like I said, I'm in Colorado right now, and how I'm seeing it manifest here, I think ultimately started with what's going on with the fires around the world, in the country, and so on. And one of the big concerns here is when you get into the mountainous regions, there's so many conifer trees up there, and there's so much beetle kill pine, and there's so many dead trees standing, and the fire risk is huge. And that's obviously being seen because it's not just here in Colorado, it's happening all over because of, I wouldn't say the mismanagement. There is some human intervention and so on, but that's a whole nother discussion. But I wanted to show this and just to give you some more thought of just potential applications. So here's one of the things that's going on here in Colorado is these, what they call these dog hair conifer forests are, you can see how close these trees are, and they're spindly, and they don't grow to that thick size that you would see in an old growth forest. And so one of their methods of fire break is what you see right here is they'll come in, they'll chainsaw them, they'll stack them in these teepee-like piles. And then in the winter, when there's low fire risk, is they'll set fire to these. And I wanted to show this for a couple reasons, because again, back to that analogy of fire, like this is one way to do it. And if they don't do this and they leave it in this form, obviously they're leaving a lot of potential fire hazard in place. But then you have all of the issues of the pollution that's being set off here. But it is effective and it's fast. And but the other way to do it is a much more, because what's going on here from a chemical level is the fire is breaking apart the carbon bonds and putting it into a different form, and it's setting it down on the ground. And that's what's going on with the primary decomposers of mycelium. It's just a much slower, but it's slower when it's inoculated than it is fire, obviously, but it's much faster than if you just put it down and let nature take over. So I was having this discussion with a friend, and it's like nature doesn't care about time. Like we are the humans, and we care about time. Like, yeah, let's get it back in the soil. Let's hurry up. Let's clear this fire, and let's let the new species grow. Like nature would do it without us. It just might seem pretty devastating to us, and that's, I think, what we're seeing now is all the fires that are going on. And this is a kind of a before after picture with that thin, that dog hair pine that's everywhere. And it has to do with the humans. It's like, we want to save our houses and our property. So let's thin it out and create these fire breaks. So I wanted to talk just briefly about, this is a project that's going on. And this is Jeff Ravage, and he works for the North Fork Watershed Coalition of the Upper South Platte River. And he started a study on wood chips 5 years ago. And so there was a large scale remediation of cutting a fire break, basically, on this property to thin out those dog hairs. And the contractor left a massive pile of wood chips. And the owner was like, what do I do with all these wood chips? And so Jeff had this fantastic idea of, let's inoculate them with some native strain and see what happened. And he did his study 5 years ago. And here's what he saw when he quantified it. Is he checked his, I'm going to move this out of the way just for a second. He quantified his in bed depth. And the way that he did it is on that plot that you saw him standing on, those wood chips, is he leveled it off to 12 inches, and then came back to the same plot after inoculating them. And I believe he used a few different species, but I think this was an oyster, a native oyster mushroom. Probably one of them, obviously, that grows on conifer, because those were all lodgepole and ponderosa pine that were in that pile. And you can see his results. And the red is obviously the control group, and the blue was the depth of the pile of the inoculated after 5 seasons or 61 months later. And you can see a pile of this size is that's quite a project. And you can see in the background how far this pile spreads, and everywhere you see an orange flag is they dropped a whole block of, and actually use different species in this pile. So back to your question, Chris, of like, can you use multiple brown rot versus white rot? Because he did introduce, I believe he had some brown rot in this pile, but they were spaced out, everywhere you see a flag. So there was oyster mushroom in there was turkey tail, and Ganoderma applanatum was in this pile as well. So I wanted to show that because I want to get everybody thinking about what are these other applications. So can you do a wood chip bed to break it down more quickly? Yeah, do it in a wood chip bed. And here's another one. This is if you are ever in the Boulder, Colorado area, please do stop by this place. It's the Benevolence Permaculture Demonstration Gardens and Orchard. And if you want to see something that's close to the Garden of Eden, you have to see this place. And they started this orchard about 5 years ago. It started out as an orchard and it expanded into, like I said, the Garden of Eden. And those of you who are familiar with permaculture, if you can think of it, they've probably done it at this 35-acre plot here. But the reason I'm showing this picture is this was a conifer pine tree that they had planted 2 years before, but they were going to make a new farm stand cover. And they were agonizing over the fact that they had to remove this tree. And I happened to be there at this time, and before they put the cover on, which ultimately they did, and they had to cut the tree down. And so I said, I'll tell you what, to alleviate your guilt about killing this tree, I said, let's give it another life. And what I meant by that was I had previously in my library taken a conifer decomposer, which is the red-belted polypore, which was growing not very far from where that was, maybe within a 10-mile radius. And you can see it growing on the stump. This is the actual tree, and you can see there's another fruit body there. And I brought this into my library and I cultured it and cloned it and introduced it to that very tree that they got cut down for the sole purpose of growing fruit bodies so that we could make a medicine for their bees. And so those of you, again, who are in permaculture, to stack all of those functions of like, okay, now we have a medicinal mushroom. Now we're feeding our bees. We recycled the wood. And these were just a couple test logs that we did. And you can see every one of them. And this is the red-belted polypore, and it's just growing on some test logs that we laid down, again, on the ground, inoculated them. I think this one we used the totem method. We just cut it in half and screwed it together and inoculated the in between. These were inoculated with some drill bits, and so were these. And these two that are in the middle, that's that tree. We just bound it together with wire so we could keep track of it. We put a tag on it. And a year and a half later, every one of these was in a advanced state of decay. They're almost paper light. And this is a brown rot fungus. And the amount of decay you can see right here is, after a year and a half, this whole entire tree that was alive on that permaculture design property is now crumbly to where you can just turn it into dust. And I just, in this picture, just grabbed a little chunk of it there. And even this little one fruited, and you can see there's a fruit right here. And so this is going to be turned into some food for the bees. And I'm sure many of the people who are watching here are familiar with, what Paul Stamets started and did his bee study about, basically feeding a low-tech mushroom tincture to the bees to potentially increase their immune system so that they could better fight off the attack of the varroa mites within their immune system. And to this point, it seems like they're having some fantastic success with that. So to be able to take something that simple, and this is actually the 2 of their hives at the Permaculture Center, which is back here, and to take it from the tree, which was here, to inoculate it with a local native species, grow medicine for the bees and the medicine for yourself. The red-belted polypore is extremely medicinal for humans as well. And now we're stacking all of these things together. All right, let me pause there just because that was kind of a lot of information quickly about what's some of the other applications. Does anybody have any questions up to that point?
We had some from YouTube that I just got from Allie.
Okay, good. Yeah.
She said, or somebody said, would you recommend recording GPS locations at the spawn you harvest for your library?
Definitely. And I'm actually doing some work with an organization right now, and that's part of what we're doing is as they're moving throughout this forested area, is they're GPSing everything that they find so that we know exactly the altitude, what species it was growing on, so that as you build this library of like, oh, we need something that grows on for here, like Douglas fir, it has to grow in the 7,000 to 8,000 foot altitude range. What do you have? Like, boom, let's pull it out of the library, create the spawn, and go ahead and inoculate it. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so let me just ask, just to clarify again, what all would you write down if you were to, collect something for your library? Obviously, you want the coordinate, you want what it's growing on. You're saying even things like elevation and
yes.
What else would you include?
Just the elevation, if you can get the GPS location, which you should, everybody can get it on their phone. So that there's just documentation of exactly where it came from, the elevation. Was it in a stand of just all ligustrum, or was it a single ligustrum, or whatever it was? Was it a cedar elm and it was surrounded by oaks, or just kind of a rough, where was it existing? Was it in a riparian area? Just any detail, because if you get into that level of matching up, like the closer you can match what you're trying to decompose, obviously the better it's going to be. The other thing that I would suggest doing is taking a photograph of it, because the wealth of knowledge that's here right now, and just this part of the Central Texas Mycological Society, is somebody can look at this picture that's on the screen right now and tell you exactly which species of Ganoderma it is. And I wouldn't suggest identifying from just photos, but if it's the best you got, I'd get some close-up photos, get some underneath photos if you do break it off, so that if there's a question about exactly what it is, put it up on the mycological page and say, hey, what is this? And there's going to be some very knowledgeable people who can tell you what it is.
And yeah, this is all kind of building on that same idea. Is there a standard operating method for starting a local spawn library?
No, you guys are going to create it. For those suggestions of, yes, document what it is, make multiple copies of it. And I'll actually, I'm going to show you a picture of why in a minute as we go. Oh, there's a quiz at the end, by the way. So, but before we get to the quiz, I'm going to show you why it's good to make the multiple copies and so on. So go ahead, Chris.
Somebody was asking about the medicinal traits of the red-belted polypore. Do you have any more details you could go into about what it's like, what the medicinal traits are like?
Yeah, well, here's what I would suggest. Each of them have their novel antimicrobial or antibiotic, and which one is the best, I have no idea. What I would suggest, if you want to know, and I would suggest, and it's amazing if you basically choose any saprophytic polypore, you go to Google Scholar and type in the Latin name for it, 99% of the time somebody has done a study on it and found a novel antimicrobial or antibiotic that exists within that. And that whole field is opening up too. Is it good for pancreatic cancer? Is it good for leukemia? Is it good for melanoma? And what I foresee is that those are going to become, like, this one is good for this cancer, this one is good for this disease. And as we build on this knowledge with each other, is that they'll find their niche, is what I'm saying.
Maybe you can speak to this. Maybe other people can speak to this too. Feel free to, comment in the chat. But somebody was asking about ash junipers here in Austin, and there's a lot of clearing of ash junipers that goes on around here, and you see a lot of it as slash on sites.
Yes.
Do you know of any fungi that can help decay that one? And it tends to be really slow to decay. Have you ever noticed anything growing on?
Yes, I have. And I actually cloned one, and this was years ago. And I believe it's still in my library. But yes, because I know that if you go out into, especially in the West Texas, where they're clearing all that ash juniper, it just kind of breaks my heart when I see those massive piles that are built up on the edge of the field. It makes sense that, again, as you're clearing those, and you just score it with the chainsaw and put that spawn in there. I don't know what it was, but it was definitely like a hoofed polypore. And my knowledge of identification is, I don't claim at all to be an expert, but that is another thing, as I mentioned earlier, is if you can get a photo of something growing on the ash or an ash juniper, and it's a polypore, or it's growing just on it, and it's not growing out of the ground, because we don't know if it's growing out of the ground. If it's growing off the side, take a picture of it, put it on the website, and ask for help for identification. And I think that's a great one. I put it in my library, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago, but I've had no use for it because in Colorado, there is no ash juniper growing here. So, but again, it's that same thing, match the species with the fungi that's already done it. Mother Nature's already done it.
Yeah. One thing I'll throw out there, this is something that I've done every once in a while, is use iNaturalist, the Explorer tool.
Yes.
And you can do filters in the Explorer tool, so you can filter out just looking at fungi. And then there's also a filter where you can put in a description or tag. So you can type in the word juniper, or you could type in, oak or ligustrum or whatever. And if people have used that word whenever they've taken a picture of a fungus, it should pop up. And so you'll see all the fungi that have been associated with that word. And so it's a quick little way to find out interactions between certain plants and fungi.
Yes. Yeah. That's a fantastic idea. Yes. And it's amazing how accurate those, again, I wouldn't say this before you eat a mushroom, but how accurate those tools are getting, where you can scan it with your phone. And with the plant identification, it's amazing. Again, don't trust your life to it, but it's really, it'll get you going in the right direction. Definitely.
Somebody's asking if there's anything you can pour on ash juniper that would assist in decay, or anything that you think, in general, does anything assist in decay? Would pouring water on it regularly or something like that assist in decay?
Yeah, that I don't know. I said I'm in the mindset of inoculate it. Mm-hmm. So again, if you had access to a chipper, I think that's the fastest way to chip it and put it down on the ground. But that could be cost prohibitive, and you can't always get them into a site. That's why I think this method, when you can't chip it, is the best.
Somebody asked if you moved to Colorado because they needed a lot of help with this kind of work. Do you have more opportunities there? Are there more mushrooms there? Was it for professional reasons that you?
Not professional. That was all family stuff.
Okay.
But that opportunity, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And like I said, we're on the beginning of it. And I hope that I'm throwing out some ideas that some people can hey, you know what he said? Like, I'm going to do this study. Like you just said, what if we mix a brown rod and a white rod together? Will it work? I don't know. Will it?
Okay. And then, some people threw out some species that they've seen on junipers. So check the chat.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I think we can continue on.
Okay. All right. So again, I was just sent this picture today. So this obviously is Ligustrum. So does Ganoderma live on it? Yeah, it does. So again, those of you who have flow hood, take a tissue sample, get this one in your libraries and start creating some spawn. And then when you go to the meetings or when your chat groups, just start inoculating. Plus you get the fruit. How would you not want that? And this was another one. I think Angel sent me this today. This was actually an inoculated ligustrum that they had done years back. And I asked her to drive by it the other day and just check on it. And she said out of the 6 or so they did, I think this was the only one that produced. Now this one, again, I can't tell from this photo, but I'm not sure if this one is a turkey tail because it's so decayed. It's hard to tell because those Sterium species is like they kind of the false turkey tail. And I can't tell from this photo. So is this just the native that crept in, or was it the one it was inoculated with? And I don't know. That's why I got the question mark there. Okay, so this one, I want to just talk briefly about this. This is a Ganoderma species, obviously, that I cloned 9 years ago, and it's growing on a cedar elm stump right along Barton Creek and very close to the Mopac Bridge. Again, on that same trail at the 360 access. I don't know how many mushrooms I still have in my library from just that one spot. I know I have a couple oysters. I have this one. I have the turkey tail and so on. But this one is when we were growing our mushroom kits, I grew thousands of these from that one mushroom. And this got spread all over the country as a kit, as a grow your own kit. And I hope the people that grew this used it for medicinal purposes and, also for the educational part of it. But the reason that I bring this up, and this is just a testament to the tenacity of creating these libraries. And actually I pulled it out because I just saw it the other day, and I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but this Petri, it fogs out because of my blur on the background. But this Petri dish is a P7. And those of you who've done cloning before, P is just what iteration, how many Petri dishes have you transferred it to? This was the 7th Petri dish. And I haven't touched this Petri dish up until a week ago. But the last time I touched it was 5 years ago. And I pulled this out when I was in the lab the other day because I knew I was going to be doing this talk, and it started to grow. And so from 9 years ago to what's in my hand right now is still alive 9 years later. And it came from one little culture that I made. And I still have the access to it. And so what I'd like to propose, I don't know, Chris and Allie, what you guys had for the giveaway, but I'd love to offer this, is that I love the idea that this came back around and it's coming home. And this reishi that's produced like hundreds of pounds of rishis and medicine and entertainment and education and wonder for kids is what I would love to do is I'd love to offer this back to someone in Austin. And so I prepared just a little quiz just for fun. And however you want to determine who wins this, I got an idea. But whoever wins it, that next time we are creating sawdust spawn, as I already started the Petri again, I know it's viable and I haven't touched it for 5 years, is that I'll throw a little bit in there, create a bag of native Central Texas Ganoderma and give it to the winner. How's that sound?
Yeah, that's amazing. Definitely.
Yeah. I love all the metaphors in that story and the beauty and the circles, and just it makes sense to me. And I literally took this on the day that I cloned it. So I took the picture and then I broke off a section and cloned it from there. And here I am 9 years later over the internet from 1,000 miles away, presenting it back to you. So
yeah.
How's that sound? How do you usually do your quizzes? You want to do it whoever first enters all the answers? There's only 4 questions on it.
Yeah, I think we'll just we'll take the first answer in the chat. So
okay.
The first one I think we'll do for your prize.
Wait,
right, just
one. The first answer or the first correct answer?
The first
yes,
correct.
of course. Yeah. All right. How about this? Let's do 2 because there's some smart people here. It's going to go fast. So I'll bring up the first question. So you got to answer both of them right. First person to answer in the chat both right. How about that?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Wait, Jim, we actually have 3 items to give away.
Okay.
So the one that you just offered, thank you very much. And then Andrew Denny with South Texas Seasonals has also offered wild Ganoderma, either, I need to clarify this, but either in liquid form or in Petri dish. So if you have 3 questions, we're offering 3, and y'all listening, we are mailing this to you free of charge. So yes.
Oh, even better, even better. Okay, I'll put the questions up. The first one is mine. And did you say that was Andrew who had created that Petri dish?
Yes, Andrew Denny.
Okay, great. And that's what I'm talking about is Andrew. You know, we've got that in the collective conscious. He's starting a library right now, and now he's sharing his library, and then it can be shared. It's kind of like kombucha SCOBY, you know, like might as well. So, all right, let me throw out my my first. Again, this is my. If you have any questions, here's my email: jimmstack@gmail.com. Jim with 2 M's. Okay. So here's we go. We'll do the first one, and Chris, I can't see the chat, so if you want to say who it is, and then if that person could actually email me, and then I can put it in my my address book and send it to you when this spawn is done, because like I said, I just started it the other day, so it's going to take a couple weeks. Okay. All right. So here we go. Here's the first question. What's the scientific name of the species used in the Ligustrum study? Simple one.
All right.
If
So
I can't-
it was Beth D. at Tremedi's Versicolor, right?
Nice. Okay. All right, Beth. Beth, email me at jimmstack@gmail.com and I'll get your address and I'll send that to you. Okay. All right. We ready for the next one?
I think so.
Okay. Second one. What organization did the biologist who ran the study work for?
I think we might. People are having a hard time getting the full name, I think.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know.
I think it needs these 2 words. Balcones Canyonlands Preserve. Yeah,
Okay.
but I would say Balcones Canyonlands. Whoever had those first 2 words.
Okay, all right. So yeah, because the next one was Balcones Preserve, and then Veronica got Balcones Canyonlands.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, good.
We'll go with Veronica.
All right. It's getting pretty heated over here. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, ready for our third one? All right, here you go. Third one. Using the Penetrometer as a metric, how much faster did the inoculated logs decompose compared to the controls? Using the Penetrometer as a metric.
I think Eric got this 11 times.
Yes, 11 times. Okay. Oh, and this fourth one, I do have one more. And let me do this because this is an interesting point too, is that once you have the species in your library, you know that you can, those of you who've done it, is that you can expand it exponentially and you can create literally the potential for thousands of pounds of either spawn, potentially if you wanted to go to mushrooms. And it's amazing just in something like that small that you can create that much life from it. And like I said, 9 years ago, I made that and I'm still doing it, still creating life. I have a species in my library that's 30 years old. I got it from a guy who grew it for 20 years and I've been growing it for 10 and it's still growing. I have some literally growing right now. And it's 30 years from one single mushroom. But the point of that is that if this is going to be done on a larger scale, is that there is what comes into play an economy of scale. So right now I'm going to produce a bag of grain spawn, and then I'll make some mushroom spawn. I believe it was for Beth who got that. But as simple as it is to make one more bag of it is not hard. To make 3 or 10 more bags of it, it's filling up the pressure cooker. It's actually a waste to just do one bag of it. You might as well do 10. And so I'm going to throw this last question out, and I know Beth got that first one. So since I'm going to make one bag, I might as well make a couple bags. And so I'll make a second bag and send it out to whoever gets this one. Okay. Okay. So last question. What species of mushroom was grown on the conifer tree at Benevolence Permaculture Center and later fed to the bees as medicine? This is the full Latin name.
Okay. Is it Fomitopsis pinicola?
Yes. Who got that one?
Eric got it.
All right. Well, Eric.
Yeah.
Eric's paying attention. He's on.
Yeah, he is.
All right, Eric, send me an email at Jimm Stack at gmail.com so I can get that to you. Okay. Well, I believe that's it. So yeah, let's do some more questions if you guys are up for it.
Allie, do we want to open up people to speak aloud, ask questions now, or what do you think? Should we just take?
I would love that. And I want to clarify something with the giveaway. So Jim, you're going to send your product to Beth. And then Eric, are you sure you don't want it? Because then I'll just give it to the next person.
Yes, spread the love, Eric.
Okay, so Shannon, you have won a prize from Andrew Denny. If you can email us at info@Central Texas Mycology with your information and address, we'll send it right over to you. Yeah. And if anyone has questions, I would encourage people to unmute and ask them.
Yeah, and I think it's not so ironic that Andrew and I were both giving the same gift, which is the mycelium of Ganoderma that grows there. Mine was just in a slightly different form. He's giving it in the Petri form, and I'm going to take it one step more and turn it into the spawn form. But yeah, so yeah, I love that. So yeah, let's just get it going. Let's get it going and start inoculating.
All right. Do you have any questions?
I just want to shout out, this is Beth D. Thank you very much. This was so informative. Thank you. I live about 10 minutes from the Balcones Canyonlands, and it's so exciting to see that this happened right in my backyard.
Great. Thank you, Beth. Yeah, you're right. You're right in the heart of where they did all that whole study. Which one are you close to?
Doeskin Ranch.
Yeah, that's amazing preserve. Like I said, I think they have 32,000 acres that they're dealing with. So,
hey guys, my name is Johanna Arndt. I actually work for the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve, and
Cool.
And so I just wanted to clarify a couple of things about it. It's a very complicated beast, a very magical, amazing, multifaceted beast. So the folks who were doing this study work for City of Austin, which manages about 13,000 acres of the preserve, which is about 32,000 acres total. I work for Travis County, which manages about the same amount. And then there's a bunch of other partners that manage the remaining amount. Doeskin Ranch is actually part of the Balcones Canyonlands National Wildlife Refuge, which is managed by the federal government. It's separate from the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve, but was created around the same time to protect the same species. And the work that Lisa and Daryl and all of them have been doing have been continuing where, with them, and then we at the county are looking at it as well and using it on the tracks that we have on the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve as well. So
nice. All right, Johanna, thank you so much, because I couldn't wrap my head around how it was structurally organized. It was too much, so I was like, I'll just lump it under Balcones Canyonlands. But yeah, so yeah, there was a lot of hands that were in it, and I think when you're talking about funding and grants and writing, is like it has to be that way. Because it is a complicated beast, and like to pull all of those resources in, like, why not?
Yeah, and that's sort of how it was even possible, because this was all done to mitigate for the removal of endangered species habitat. We have a incidental take permit with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and so in order to set aside the 32,000 acres, it was all hands on deck. So that's why there's so many different managers, because so many different entities had to come together to make that happen.
Okay. Well, Johanna, thank you. Because that brings up something else that I just wanted to throw out there. And Johanna, since you're in that world, is as I mentioned, when I went to Austin in 2017 and talked to or gave that presentation, I also, part of that was they they got a laminar flow hood, and that's still there. I believe it's with the city of Austin.
Mhm.
And there were a couple people who really got it. And I suggested, let that be your in-house library right there, is so that those, and plus you're traveling in those realms of like, oh, what's that? It's growing on this. It's growing on this. What's the Chinese? There's another invasive species, the Chinese, help me out.
Well,
Privet.
Privet, yeah.
Chinese tallow and Chinese privet. And
China berry.
There's also China berry.
China
Yeah,
berry.
China
Sorry,
berry.
thank you. Yes, China berry. Yeah, there's a bunch of them. And that's what I mean is like the China berry. That was the one I was thinking of, is that as you're moving through that and you're doing your field work, is like there's something that's growing on the China, it decomposes it. Take that, culture it, put it in your library. And if you're going to do a remediation and you can't get a chipper, once you get that system down and you know how to do it, you can expand it out and you can make spawn for the year in like 2 runs, and then have it and use it as your best practices. And so I put that out to you, but I'm also saying to the other people who are working with the organizations of, the county or the wildlife district or the, even if it's the local neighborhood group who, whatever, is that if the more people that are working on this, the better.
And I think someone told me, doesn't Hi-Fi have a library of local fungus? Haven't they been working on that? I could be wrong.
So I'm not the best person to speak on this, so if anyone knows more about Hi-Fi, chime in. But I do know that they have a Ganoderma, a local Ganoderma species that they've been growing out. That's as much as I know about that. I also want to add, because this came up in the chat too. So David Lewis with the Gulf States Mycological Society just got access to an herbarium at Texas A&M. And so he is interested. He already added 40 plus hundreds of fungal species to that herbarium. But he is now more focused on Central Texas and building up that collection at Texas A&M. So it's a little far for some of us, but he has the space and welcomes the help. So if anyone's interested in learning about that, please email us and we'll find a way to connect y'all and go visit him.
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Oh, Shannon, did you have a question?
I did. I was wondering, what kind of credentials do we need to work in these organizations? Having a lot of experience growing from Petri to, I kind of live in a wooded area and just, there's turkey tail growing and I make tinctures and all that kind of stuff. But what do I need to really have credentials to get into something like, what you're doing, to that next level? Do I need to have a Bachelor of Science, and do I need to go back and get those 6 hours that I missed from a Bachelor of Science? And are they looking for that type of stuff? Do they want experience? Do they want university credentials? Do you have any advice?
And Johanna could probably answer this one more, but if I had to break that down and say one thing, it would be insurance. Because to come in as a consultant is like you're consulting, and obviously you have that background knowledge. And do you need a degree? I think it's more based.
Hold on, not your level, not at your level.
Oh,
But
okay.
just working in a larger capacity in a larger community with these organizations and whatnot, getting to your level is far away. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Something smaller, but working
small,
in an
yeah.
organization. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, all right. Here's my opinion on that is I would not waste time with a degree. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but the amount of information that's out there right now, and just within this group, there's so much knowledge that to get the official degree, I don't think is the best use of your time. I think it's your experience and what you've shown to be, what have you grown? How well can you grow it? Do you have a library? And ultimately, it's going to come down to, like everything else, is your connections that you've made with other people. And it's like, oh, Shannon, I saw you grew this oyster mushroom. I'm thinking of growing it. We want to start a little farm over here. Can you help us out? Because I know you know how to do it. So I would say making the personal connections with people is the way to do it. And again, I wouldn't think that you need to go to that level of education and spend all that money. I would say focus it on what you want to do,
Okay, but I'm on the right
it'll
track.
happen. Oh,
I'm on the
yes.
right
Yes.
track. Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah. You just asked the right question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll second that. I don't know specifically about working with, growing fungus because that's not our focus yet anyway. But, working at the preserve, everybody has a different background. We have a woman who has a master's in planning. I have an undergrad in law, and it's just, there are different, the paths are winding and it's who you know and what
Yes.
passions you have and what directions you end up sort of falling into that get you to these spots. And it's something I hear all the time, and I totally agree with this, is there's so many people who want to be doing conservation work and there's so few jobs, and it's frustrating for everybody. And I hope that initiatives like this, maybe there's more growth in this industry that'll help more people do this kind of work.
Yes, how do we get this into like the Army Corps of Engineers, integrating like a massive database for the entire country through the Army Corps of Engineers, and having all these different outfits and organizations contributing to it, but then having them like oversee the entire project, because I know that they are by the book. Like we saved our property over here based on migrating birds over here, and they rejected all of the offers to tear all of this property up because of that. So I know that seems like a government, or like a way in to kind of the government to expand the demand for this large supply of people who want to get into conservation.
I think the short answer to that is that when the evidence becomes overwhelming, that's when that change will come. And I think because this is such a new and novel field relatively, is that, this study, when I was talking to another colleague who's in this field, and he said to me, he goes, well, how come I've never heard of this before? Why is this not common knowledge that we're cutting these trees down and speed up the decomposition? Is because it doesn't have enough time behind it and enough overwhelming evidence, and enough, studies. And that's mostly what we base everything on, is scientific. And I think, one of the other avenues that comes to mind is, this is a delicate topic for a lot of people, but the topic of psilocybin is like when the evidence becomes overwhelming, that's when it moves into the next level. And I think the psilocybin, at least because I'm in Colorado and it's a different feel here, where in Denver, it's kind of not quite been decriminalized, but I think there's so much overwhelming evidence of the efficacy and the potential benefit that we're going to kind of not technically say it, but we're going to back up because there's so much momentum behind that. Yeah. And someone said in Oregon too, is that when it becomes overwhelming, like you can't deny it anymore, then it becomes the norm. And with these mycroremediation, I think we're, and the whole world of mycology too, is like the medicinal effects, the remediation, how to grow it in your own environment. That's where we are right now.
Yeah, I feel like we need to get the Army Corps involved in this, because they can pass out this what is it called? The Penetrometer. These kits that could be deployed, they could be deployed to all these different regions and then collect this data and then have push to get the evidence in a
Shannon.
systematic way.
Yeah, well, that's your next project. Go ahead and start one and start documenting your evidence.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, 11 times, that is pretty overwhelming evidence for me. 11 times. Yeah, that's significant. But it's getting that information out and getting, I mean, I guess that's what you're doing.
That's what we're doing. Isn't that what we're doing here?
That's
Like,
what
hey,
you're doing. It's like, how
congratulations.
do you get this like deployed everywhere where mushrooms are, growing? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. Yeah, I think it was that Paul said, yeah, we're spreading the spores. That's what we're doing. All those threads that come together when you look at the mycelium under a microscope and they cross over, it's the same pattern as the galaxies. It's the same pattern as the neurons in our brain and so on. So yeah, we're just these nodes that are crossing, and we're sending information to each other through this process right now. And so we'll each take our little piece and we'll run with it at whatever level we're at.
And I really appreciate what you said, Jim, about all the things that we still have yet to learn, right? Like how important is it to have diversity, genetic diversity in the fungus that we're using, whether it's within the same species or among different species, and will it have an impact on the local flora and fauna and fungal population? And then will it have different effects in different regions in that regard? So I think it's really exciting and there's a lot of potential, but there's reasons to go slowly and to get an overwhelming, body of evidence before really deploying it wide scale.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Just like everything else, there's no part of nature that you can move without it having that domino / Rubik's cube effect. And it is so new. I totally agree. Now start slow, make sure that there's not some unintended, unknown consequence that's going to happen. Like Chris brought up, is like, what if we monocrop the turkey tail and we start putting it on every ligustrum that gets cut in Central Texas? What is that going to move in the chain? We can't pull on one without the other. So that's why, to me, like the diversity of that, get some Ganoderma, get some Mysterium, whatever's growing on it, start introducing multiple in there and mix it up, even if it's within the same 100 meters. Is like, there's a Ganoderma pile, there's a Trametes pile, there's a Mysterium pile, there's whatever else. Yeah, that just makes sense. It's about diversity and collaboration at the same time.
Oh, Jim, this is John Hart Asher. I just want to say this is really interesting to me. I do a lot of prairie restoration, and a big challenge for us is the woody growth that really starts to take out our herbaceous components. And those grasslands are really driven by the fact that microbial presence under the ground, those later successional species have to have a mycorrhizal association. And when dealing with ligustrums in particular, and we're doing a few restoration projects around where we have to go clear what we call ligustrum barrens, but the ligustrums barrens vegetatively suppress everything. But there's a lot of research where the exudate from their roots nuke any mycorrhizal profile and lock it in this bacteria dominant thing. So if we try to go back and start that cycle, you're really starting from scratch, and it's really hard to get some of that herbaceous component. So I love this idea of using fungi to attack something that's attacking fungi and starting this process. I really appreciated your talk tonight.
Thank you, John. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like the complexity of it. Like, who knew that ligustrum was exuding some sort of anti-mycorrhizal enzyme in there, because everything is vying for that precious ground and space and life, and everything is a constant battle going on. And how do we balance it out? And like I said earlier, it's like, here we are as the human beings, and we're looking at this puzzle, and like, we're concerned with time. We want to put it back in the earth so we can benefit. We want to cut down these trees so our properties don't burn. And in nature, like, it doesn't care. And all we can do is just kind of hang on and try to figure it out and say, hey, can we have a little bit of help here? We'll just do it a little by little. But it's just way too complex. And that reminds me of buying a packet of mycorrhizal spores on the internet seems like a great idea. But how many species are you getting in there? Is, okay, you got 5. like you really want to take a soil analysis to see what's in there? It's like, you're not going to cover it with 5. To me, I love this idea that people have used, where And I'll just throw this one out, John. I love this study idea. I've already proposed this to another group, but let me throw it out to this whole group. Is in the remediation or the remediation of grass or prairie lands, is to basically take a swath out of the soil, say 1 meter by 1 meter, go down 1 foot deep, put in some sort of substrate, whether you want to use some partially cooked rice or some wheat, but do it in a basket and let the native mycorrhizal fall in, all the microorganisms. That complexity, you could never recreate that in a lab.
Yeah.
But if you put it down there in the field, nature will move into it, pull that out, and use it as I like to think of it as a fecal implant. It's kind of discussing how they do it in humans, but you're doing it into nature and you're dropping it out in that field where you want to establish your new grasses. And if they need a mycorrhizal association or a relationship with a bacteria that exists, but you don't even know what it is.
Right.
And science probably might never figure it out, but nature has. And all you did was move it. You picked it up and like, here, you take it. It's like creating a nursery.
Well, I'd love to know that process. We've tried to do inoculants and it's 50-50 out on the research, whether it takes or not. So we generally just plant later successful species that we have, essentially, like you're saying, in the hopes that that's inoculating areas to get that going. And we know that it can take up to 40 years, if not more, for that soil food web presence to even start to resemble what it would be in a mature system.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I love that idea I just explained, because again, with that complexity in mind, is if your inoculants are 5 different species of something and you throw it in there, is maybe there's 1,000, maybe there's 10,000 different things that are all interacting with each other, none of which you can figure out because it's too complex for the humans. But if you basically take it and give it a substrate to live on, you don't have to recreate it. You just have to replant it.
Right.
And then all of that complexity is just you're moving it.
Well, thank you.
Okay, there's your next research project.
That idea we were talking about on a property, basically just like doing a foray and just collecting a basket full of whatever we find, and then putting it in areas that we kind of want to, when we're all done, just place the fruiting bodies that we found in an area that we kind of want to inoculate. But I think your idea sounds better.
Yeah. Or take them and put them in a bucket of water and let them drop all their spores in there and dilute that into 20 buckets and then throw those spores all over the place. And now you got a mixture of all the different species from their spore, give them a chance to spread out. Like that's some basic level or some very rudimentary propagation that way. But yeah, because to me it works for, I think of the scenario of an old established apple orchard, for example, and the complexity in the soil and what's working with the roots of that system is to use that idea that we were talking about with John, where you sink something down into the soil, collect all of it at once, and not just those 5 or so species that are known of in the mycorrhizal equation. You want to start a whole new orchard, use that as your inoculant. So yeah, it goes on and on. It goes, we can keep creating. Yes. So anyway, so any more questions you want to do?
I have one. I had a question. Have you ever tried, I was thinking about this, in the Petri dish, introducing hydrogen peroxide into the Petri dish. So when it got into nature, and then in the rain, it naturally has hydrogen peroxide in it. Would that, introducing while it's a baby, would that help to pasteurize it as I take it through the stages? Do you think that's a good idea? Should I try to do some experiments with that?
I would say first do some experiments, and see what happens. What I've tried some things similar, but what I found is it makes the solution too liquidy, and then you have the added potential contaminant and vector of a liquid that's now sitting in your Petri dish, because the stability of the hydrogen peroxide wears off relatively quickly. And so I personally wouldn't take that chance of making a watery petri dish. I don't think the benefits would outweigh
Okay.
the danger of contaminating your petri dish.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
All right, Chris, you see any more?
No, I can ask some questions.
Yeah, of course.
I've noticed in ligustrum removal, I come back like a year later, and this is not inoculating it with anything at all, but kicking over a stump or two, and then I would see that the wood was spalted. For those who aren't familiar, basically it's this pattern that fungi leave in the wood that looks like black banding. Have you noticed that the turkey tails leave spalting, or do you suspect that that might be some other kind of fungus?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't noticed it with the turkey tail. And that's interesting. I don't know if certain species leave that coloration or not, but I haven't noticed anything specific with the turkey tail.
Okay. I can actually share an image too if y'all want to see.
Oh yes, of course.
That spalted wood before. Let's see if I can share it. I'll just share it in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that reminds me of another thing is like there's all of these as the world of mycology increases, is what's also coming out is a lot of micro industries of potential profit or career or whatever. But the spalting thing, of those of you who, if you wanted to look up some images of it on Google Images, but basically there's some high-end woodworkers that love spalted wood, and they would kill to have it. So to me, the idea is that if you find the species that create that spalting pattern, is to get a log of oak or whatever it is and inoculate it on the edges with those that make those patterns, and maybe use a few of them so that when they blend together and the mycelium travels through there, and then sell that to the woodworkers and sell it for high end, because they would love to make a bowl out of that that has all those patterns and those colors in it. Or did your picture come up, Chris?
I think I sent
I'm sorry.
it.
Oh, okay.
Can I click that link? Yeah, I made that frame as a gift for somebody. Did it work?
Chris, it did work. It just, on my computer, it had me download it first before I could even open it.
Okay. Sorry. I couldn't figure out how this to do it. Well, I think that answers all my questions. I don't know if anybody else has any others.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, if there's no more.
Is it Shannon?
Yeah, I got a real quick one if we still have time.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know what your opinions are with regards to a particular part of what's now kind of the mushroom farming industry, is this mass amount of recycled blocks that are becoming available as a byproduct. And it seems like these are obviously a great opportunity for remediation. I'm curious if you see, you're talking about different, micro opportunities in business that people are seeing with different parts of this, whether or not it's a business opportunity or just a great donation opportunity. Do you see any great uses for these recycled blocks with regards to remediation? And also too, do you think that the remediation from byproducts like this might be not as beneficial in regards to industries that basically, for a lot of them right now, are basically getting commercial grain spawn from places where the genetics might be cultivated out of state or more specific to just a farming environment and not be an invasive species or not the best remediation species?
Yeah, those are all great points. Is because what you mentioned there at the end is the potentiality of introducing a non-native species, and what are the ramifications of that. As far as using those spent spawn bags or spent grow kits for remediation is I think there's a lot of how do I put this? There's a lot of remediation ideas that seem like good ideas, but in actuality, because of the complexity of the system, is they're not that simple. Like, for example, I think when many of us heard of microfiltration, we're like, okay, it's going to save the world. All we got to do is set up a whole bunch of these spent kits, run some water through it. And there's been multiple attempts at having a myco filters built on the edge of a pond and so on. But the reality of the water, from a water engineer's perspective, is like, if you need a consistent flow at a consistent level at a consistent rate, and nature doesn't work that way, it's going to throw a big flood and wash your whole pile out, and then it's going to drought, and there's all of those variables in there. Even the one with the remediation of oil and breaking down the oil is, I think years ago when we all heard about that and we saw the videos or the pictures of that pile that Paul Stamets produced, and there was oyster mushrooms all over and it broke down the oil, is like, that it's going to save the world. And then what happened to it? Like, where did it go? Why is that not best practices? And I think, again, when you get into the complexity of the nature, is it's a great idea. But I actually, when I went there for one of his seminars, I pulled aside one of the lead guys and I'm like, tell me what's going on. Like, why is that not best practices? Why did we never hear about that oil spill that was in the Bay of San Francisco? And they built those bins and they used that fantastic idea of hair nets to catch all of that oil. They had volunteers scooping. If you've ever seen hair, how it collects oil, it's fascinating. It'll suck it up like that. And then they put it in these bins on the beach, and they had a bunch of volunteers and they inoculated it. And I never heard anything else. They did a big news story on it. And what happened was, the way that they described it there was that it works too well. And I was like, what do you mean it worked too well? Is that, he said, one of the byproducts when the mycelium started to break apart the oil was benzene gas. And so there was all of this benzene gas that was evaporating in the air. He's like, thank God nobody lit up a cigarette. Otherwise, the whole thing just would have blown up in flames. And so that's what I mean, is there's always little pieces in there that it seems like a great idea, but we gotta build on it slowly, like we said many times, and figure out where the snags are in this whole puzzle, because we can't move one piece of it without moving the others.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome. I guess one quick follow-up, I think that there might be a future for, you mentioned, getting local species that work already in the environment, potentially as a benefit to farmers, being able to say, like, hey, this is the species that we grow and it came from a local area, therefore we can use it in local remediation, and that might be something beneficial for the farming aspect of it. Are there any of those remediation efforts that you've seen? You said there's a lot that seemed like they were going to work really great but didn't turn out. Is there anything that you like right now? I mean, obviously the work that you've just done is fantastic. Is there anything else happening you think is good in that space that's working?
Yeah, I did talk with a gentleman a couple of months ago about, and I don't remember exactly where, I think he was in Washington State, and he did a kind of a medium scale remediation of oil. And they inoculated, I think it was 30 cubic yards of soil that had diesel in it. And they had it tested afterwards. It took 2 years, and they inoculated the pile with, I think it was an oyster mushroom, but they did it twice. And each time they had better effects, and it eventually got to the level where it was below the standards. And they were building something on it where it didn't need to be remediated to a level that was, next to impossible. They were going to build some structure over it, and it didn't have to be, but they actually moved it beyond the level and were able to build whatever the structure was. But it took a lot of effort and time, 2 years, a double inoculation, a lot more work and spawn than they thought. So that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. But to me, it's just the potential that's here within this group. And then there's groups like this all over the country, that these ideas that we're sharing with each other are building on each other. And someone's going to come up with a novel idea and they're going to share it like you guys do with your chats and so on. And then we're going to keep building on it. And we're eventually going to be like, yeah, this works. And this is the way to do it. And here were my mistakes. And hopefully it becomes best practices at some point.
I can ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Shannon.
Do you know anybody? Is there anybody doing like bioengineering of any types of mushrooms, like with these advances with mRNA and gene editing, making mushrooms even, more robust and more, or even with these invasive species of making them, making their immune system where it's not as strong with CRISPR? Or people, do you know anybody who's working in that field?
Actually, I do know one guy. I don't. They are working with that, and I won't give away his idea. But yes, they're definitely working with that. And what I was kind of, I'll generalize it. I don't want to give away if he has any patent pending on this, but basically, is he was copying the flavor of a mushroom. They basically found out which DNA created the flavor. And then they were creating the flavor of the mushroom outside of the mushroom itself. And then they were adding it to whatever food or beverage they were trying to change the flavor of. So how far does it go? I don't know. You never know what kind of, all of those labs that are set up and how much research, and to splice a gene is nothing. And so, but on the other side, the potential for the medicines is huge. It's huge. And I always think about it this way. You think about the mycelium that has to move through all of this hostile environment. And when we look at those little droplets that are like kind of yellowish in color, that is some sort of antibody that's being excreted by the mycelium to fight off whatever whatever bacteria or virus it's interfacing with at that point at the mycelial level. And it's like, it created it out of what? Out of its own intelligence in its DNA. And do humans want to tap into that intelligence? Of course. Because right now, the microorganisms are running the world. They always have been, but it's in our face right now because this thing we call COVID number 19 is all around us. That microorganism is like, hey, you guys want to know who's in charge? Well, let me flick this at you. And so, is that where the answer lies too? I was like, yeah, of course it does. So we're rapidly trying to figure that out.
It has to. Bacteria, that virus have been attacking bacteria since the beginning of time. And that's why, people should not be scared of this technology, because CRISPR is basically those spaces in the genetic code that that's their immune system. That's how that was how it was discovered. Did you know it was a scientist in Spain who discovered CRISPR? Jane Doudna, I think her name was, that did who brought it into fruition. But this Spanish doctor is the one who saw the code. He was working with E. coli, with these really basic bacteria, and he was seeing that there's these spacers in between the genetic code. And he's like, this has to be part of its survival mechanism, because they don't have a lot of energy. They don't have enough energy to waste. So it has to be something with its survival. And then it was through, a bunch of different scientists and at Berkeley at their research lab where she was, that they figured out what that was. And that's what CRISPR is. And it's like, it's been happening since the beginning of time. We've just been able to tap in and how to do it, because the RNA it already knows where to cut it exactly. And so it seems like this is going to be the future of everything. And mushrooms have to be the future of it all, because they've been here before everything.
Yeah, I think they're definitely part. And to me, like, all of technology is it's a rediscovering of what nature's already figured out a long time ago. And little by little, that's why I love like talking with groups like this, is because we're piling on this cumulative knowledge of someone will throw something out there. And basically we're just unwrapping it little by little. And with the advent of electron microscopes and, Hubble telescopes, is like, oh, that was there all along. And we're just slowly figuring it out.
X-ray crystallography figuring
Yeah,
out
it's
how
just
to
the whole, the
day.
whole runs deep for sure. So,
Yeah.
all right, I've got to get going. So, thank you guys. And Chris and Allie and Angel too, please, share my appreciation with all of you. And if anybody has any questions, I'm sure like we opened up a whole lot of things to think about. Please send me an email at Jimm Stack. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Oh, and especially those two of you, I'm going to start my Petri dish. I'm going to put it in the next phase. It's already growing. So I'm going to put it probably next week. I'll start some grain spawn, then I'll make some sawdust spawn for you and send it back to its home in Texas. So send me your addresses so I can send that to you. And thank you all for sharing your time and your knowledge. And I hope that just this discussion has started some thinking that we can just, like I said, just keep layering it on top of each other, because we need it, to be honest. Like there's so much going on in the world with all the craziness and the fires and the COVID and the temperature changes and so on. Is like we're going to need to figure out something. And to me, with all of these grassroots movements and amateurness that's going on, is like we're bound to come up with it. And I hope that I just add a little bit to that. So thank you all. I really appreciate it. It's good to hear from some Texans again. I appreciate everyone. And yeah, so if you guys have any questions or anything else you need from me, like I said, just send me an email. I'll be happy to answer any questions I can.
Thank you so much for coming on, Jim. Just one last question. So
Sure.
I shared your email in the chat, but is there any social media platforms that you're on or website?
Not yet. We're rebuilding all of it right now. It's like we put it back to scratch. And so no, I don't have it. I wish I was working feverishly to get it done, but I don't have it yet. So in the meantime, yes, please do send me an email there and we can go from there.
Okay. Can I recommend, so when you get your website up and social media up, you email us and then we can blast it on our page? Okay.
That would be awesome. Thank you, Allie. I appreciate it. And Chris, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. We really love it.
Have a great night.
Okay, good. All right, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you at the next one. Have a great night.
Thank you, Ellie. Bye.